You are in an anxious avoidant dynamic or relationship, or you tend to attract avoidance or anxious partners, this episode is going to be one you will not want to miss. Guys, I have Rebecca and Pablo on the podcast. This is a former anxious avoidant couple, and they've healed and they've come into their secure attachment. But they give us some really juicy insights into what it's like to be in an anxious avoidant dynamic and what it takes to actually get to that space where both partners are healing and working towards secure attachment. I'm so excited to share this conversation with you. We are going to dive into the psychology behind the attraction of why anxious and avoidant people are even attracted to each other in the first place. We are going to hear from Pablo, who is more avoidant attachment, what his experience has been like in relationships as an avoidant person. Super insightful when we have partners that are avoidant, right? And then we're going to hear from Rebecca, who's more on the anxious side, his wife, and her experience of dating an avoidant and healing her anxious attachment. She's going to give us some insight into what does it mean to set a boundary with an avoidant partner and an ultimatum, and what's the best thing to do when we're at the point where we cannot take it anymore and we need change to happen in the relationship. And she's going to take us through a process of when to know to walk away from the relationship. We're also going to hear of how they saved their marriage. Yep, that's right. Anxious and avoidant couples absolutely can be successful at marriage and relationships, and what it takes, what's the main thing you need, whether you're anxious or avoidant or fearful avoidant, to become more securely attached. I really enjoyed having Rebecca and Pablo on the podcast, and I just know that you were going to be inspired by their stories and by them as a couple, because it was just such a joy to host them. And if you do want to dive more into healing your anxious attachment, if you listen to this conversation and you're like, right, I'm ready to create that secure foundation, not only for my partner, but for myself as well. I do have a guide that will take you through your first few steps in the show notes. So go ahead and download that guide for free. And you'll also find Rebecca and Pablo's resources and website in the show notes as well. Okay, I'm going to stop talking. Let's get into this episode. Hello, my loves. Welcome back to the Relationship Rehab Podcast. Today, we have a treat. We have an insight into what it's like to navigate an anxious and avoidant dynamic in a relationship and how to heal as a couple. So I'm super excited to welcome Rebecca and Pablo onto the podcast from Connection Counseling. So guys, thank you so much for joining me
here. Thank you for having us. Yeah.
I'm so excited to ask you guys all the questions, and I'm sure all the listeners are dying to hear all of the insights and advice and guidance that you have to offer about this very interesting dynamic that a lot of us either find ourselves falling back into or have been into or are currently in one as well. So let's just kick off with your story as a former anxious avoidant couple. What did that look like for you personally?
Well, for me personally, I had an avoidant mother who I was very, very close to. And as much as you can be close to an avoidant. So there wasn't a lot of verbal communication. There wasn't a lot of physical affection. But I would say that the boundaries were actually porous in sort of a strange, almost like emotional, psychological connection. Okay, so very, very close to her. So as a child, I was always seeking her attention and her nurturing and validation. The things that she wasn't able to give me, I was seeking. And so as I learned through years of therapy and years of studying to become a psychotherapist, what I learned was that unconsciously we are always trying to mend that wound, that childhood wound. So then we seek relationships that repeat that dynamic. So then I was very attracted to avoidant partners because it felt comfortable and because unconsciously I was trying to repair that. So in came Pablo, who was very avoidant, and it was a perfect match.
Yes. So for me, I was, before Rebecca, I dated many, many people. And yeah, similar to Rebecca, I was just repeating the same pattern. And because my mother was anxious, kind of teetering on mental illness, most of the women that I dated were very, very similar. And I was so wounded from my childhood trauma that happened when I was 9 years old when my mom sent me away, is that I kept repeating it right down to not even just anxious, like I just right down to the height, the body size, everything was similar to my mom. Like that's how much I was drawn into and how much I was in pain. And I never went to somewhere where, I need a calm kind of someone that's going to be nurturing. And it was just like, part of it was also that I feared it. I didn't trust it. It didn't feel safe to me, but the chaos did, right? When I was a child, I was just used to chaos. I didn't know if it was coming today. Like when you open the door from school, is the fighting still happening or is it today a good day? So the adrenaline, that dopamine that I was searching for many, many years. And so, yeah, in our relationship, when we met, it was just the push-pull dynamic that we noticed from the anxious and avoidant relationship. And that was something that I was just used to. For me, that interpret love, like me pulling away, she's chasing, that was just familiar to me. And it happened in every single relationship that I did have. It was very, very tough until I finally realized that, okay, well, I can continue these patterns or I can start to heal.
So interesting that you bring up the concept of the soul looking to repeat the same experiences that we had in our childhood in order to what I call close the trauma loop, close the attachment loop, and replay the scenario, the experience in order to get a different outcome. And that's why we then attract the partners that represent our parents, because it becomes our primary attachment. And it's so interesting that you guys have been able to be aware of that. You've been able to see it play out as well. I want to come to you, Pablo, first of all, because you mentioned that you had repetitive relationships that very much represented what your mother was about, down to the body size, etc. Being an avoidant, and I know this is such a pressing question to a lot of us anxious attachers, is what does it look and feel like from your perspective as someone who used to identify with avoidant attachment that gets into relationships with more anxious attachers, seeing this pattern play out? And I know a lot of us are very confused as to why avoidants even choose individuals that are more on the anxious side, because it's everything that they push away. I'd love to hear more about your experience with that and, yeah, an insight into what's going on for you.
Yeah, for me, I think the narrative in almost every relationship was for me to kind of connect with my mother, just trying to repair it, try to soothe her. But I put so much months and years into it, but I could never figure it out. And so then in those relationships, it tended to be, well, okay, well, I can't figure it out. It's just either she's just unsafe, she's unstable, I can't do it no more. And then of course it would trigger me. And it was in my 40s when I started realizing, okay, well, there were several partners, and it was almost this thing where you almost deflect that responsibility. And I thought, okay, well, it must be them. I just can't do it. They're too anxious, or it's just too needy. It's just overwhelming. And so for some avoidance, personally for me, it was very overwhelming for me. And then my brains had flashbacks of when I was 9 years old, when my mom, it could have been her entering the room, and it was just her facial expression, her energy, her mood, and that would set me off. And then I would just go back into my shell. As we know, like avoidance represent almost similar to something like a turtle, where a turtle gets startled, scared, it goes right back into their shell. And that shell is really, really hard. And that's what I tended to do. And then I just was used to that push-pull dynamic. When I pulled away, the women would chase. And I was used to that. And then unconsciously, the patterns I just kind of fell into is that I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel safe for a long time. And it would take literally days for me to get over just an argument. I couldn't trust her, and then even after that, it was little baby steps getting to like, can I trust you? And it was a lot of nurturing and a lot of things that my partner was doing that made me feel, okay, maybe it's safe. But then again, a week later, it would repeat. And then it would be this, it sounds silly now as you're healthy, that I repeated that for years. And of course, what was happening for her as well, right? And I was triggering her because I used to leave the house when we had an argument. So then I would emotionally and physically leave her. But that's how much it was triggered. I just felt unsafe and I didn't want to be around it. And I just repeated those same patterns for 40 years. At the end of the day, when I look back, I didn't feel safe. And I think that's the main thing is I didn't feel safe.
And safety is everything in a relationship, right? And that's what we see with the anxious and the avoidant. The avoidant feels safe when they have space, and the anxious feels safe when they've got that close connection. But when it feels unsafe when the other person takes space, and then it feels unsafe for the avoidant when the anxious wants too much close connection. And it's like, where do we disrupt this pattern? I'm curious, Pablo, what was different about Rebecca that you guys were able to heal together and are
I
now
think
married?
the turning point came to me about, I think it's been about 5 years now, is that I was, even though we were married, like Rebecca and I have been together for about 15 years now, and we got married in 2014. Even though I was married, I almost had like 1 foot in, 1 foot out. I could never commit fully to being vulnerable and connected and compassionate. And about 5 years ago, I hit rock bottom. And for me, it was doing the same destructive patterns that I was used to since I was a kid. And it was either, well, you can continue doing that same thing, but it wouldn't be with Rebecca. So at that time, I realized, well, I can become the man that she wanted me to become. And at the time, again, I hit rock bottom. I had nowhere to go, and I didn't want to lose her. So then I said, okay, let's try it, right? And we often, when everything is taken away from us, that's when some people do change. It doesn't happen often, but it happened for me. But my rock bottom was my springboard. And that's when I started meditating, journaling, reading, going to therapy consistently. And that's when things started to change. But I think a big part of it was Rebecca was much healthier than I was. She did her work before I did. So then at that time, I felt obligated. I felt like, okay, well, she's doing her work, and made it easier for me because she wasn't triggering me as much. So it made it easier for me not to leave the house and have discussions, not arguments and fights. And that's what laid the foundation for me. And and then once I did that, I just, in my unconscious brain, I healed my mom. So that was really a pinnacle moment. And that's rock bottom for me, was losing everything. And
I just want to be clear, because I know that a lot of people do this. They'll give an ultimatum. You change or I'm leaving. And that's not really what happened, because I had already become a psychotherapist and I already had done so much therapy and I was pretty secure myself. When we had the discussion, it wasn't really an ultimatum. It was more, your behavior is really stressful to me, and I love you, and I would do anything for you, except I can't sacrifice myself for you. And your behavior and what's happening in our relationship is actually really injuring me emotionally, but also physically. At that point, the stress was so bad. I thought I have to save myself, because anxious attached people tend to want to save, like they have a savior complex. They want to save their partners all the time. But I learned that I need to save myself. And so as committed as I was and as much as I would do anything for him, at that point, I decided that I would choose myself and I would save myself first. And basically that's the conversation we had. I said, I literally can't do this. I can't let myself continue in this relationship because it's hurting me too much. And so it wasn't really an ultimatum. I was just telling him, this is what's happening for me and I can't let it happen. So I didn't even say you have to change, I just said this is what I have to do. And I think that helped. But it was also like Pablo had a very successful business, but they were expanding. And during COVID, they couldn't get the supplies and the work to do the construction and everything. And then, just long story short, he lost the business. And so that hit rock bottom, which hit his self-esteem. Then he had to go get a job in an industry where he felt like he was going backwards. And then old patterns of like flirting with other women and stuff like that to get his ego stroked and help his self-esteem. That's kind of what affected like everything, the stress of losing the business, because I was involved too. And then the whole thing with him, like talking to another woman was kind of like, I can't continue with that. And so I think for him, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think all of those things were his rock bottom but you see, I also understood why he was behaving the way he was, because I knew that was his rock bottom. And I knew that he was just like reaching out for anything that would help him feel better.
I think avoidants are, like, they come across as like selfish, or because they don't speak anything, but there's a lot of dialogue happening inside because we don't verbalize it. So I think for me, it was just a lot of shame, and I was failing everywhere. In every aspect of my life, I was failing. It's often the narrative of an avoidant. So when I started healing and reading books, and it might sound silly, but for the first time, I felt like, and I didn't realize it for so long, that I literally had Rebecca's heart. Like everything I did, everything I said, from the time I wake up to the time I go to sleep, everything affected Rebecca. And as an avoidant, when you're unhealthy, you don't realize that. But when I started getting healthy, I started realizing, oh my God, everything I was doing and saying is affecting her. So then I started changing the dialogue and asking her, when I woke up, when I went to work, is there anything I need to do for you? Putting her first, priority of hers, because whatever ever happened in my life for that day, then I knew that Rebecca was taken care of. And that started changing the dynamic. And I think that was a pinnacle part for me, is that I'm not alone in this. So, and
It's what a powerful share. What a powerful share. I want to go in so many different directions right now, but I want to come back and loop to the point that you made, Rebecca, because you're so right in saying that it is not about giving an ultimatum. It's not about pointing the finger and telling them that they got to change. We can never make anybody change. And if anything, that's probably going to make the avoidant retreat even more into their shell, because now we're putting all this pressure, all this blame, all this shame onto them. So instead of that, what I'm hearing, Rebecca, is that you took a step back and you set a boundary. And there's a difference between setting the ultimatum and setting a boundary. That you've already done the work on yourself, which in and of itself creates even more of a foundation of safety within the relationship when someone is leading the way, if you will, in terms of edging more and more towards secure attachment. But you took that power back. You didn't throw it in their face. Your power was still with you. And you said, I cannot do this anymore. I'm not standing for this anymore. And this is what's going to happen on my side. And you had that self-worth inbuilt already. I do just want to dive a little bit deeper, though, because you mentioned some of the challenges that you guys went through during that rock bottom phase. And one of them being looking for that validation and that ego stroking elsewhere. This is such a common one between the anxious and avoidant relationships. I wonder, because I know a lot of our listeners are anxiously attached, and they give the benefit of the doubt over and over and over again because they're living in this space of hoping that this person will change. And if they just understand them more, then they'll be able to crack through them and be able to help them. When do we draw the line there, Rebecca? Like, in your experience and perspective, where do we draw the line between understanding and having compassion as to why this person is doing what they're doing, and by having that standard of being like unacceptable, I'm walking away?
It's a very delicate balance. And I think that that's the balance in any relationship, is the balance between their needs and your own needs. So you want to understand them. I mean, that's key. You have to understand what's happening for them and help them and help fulfill their needs. But you also have to protect your own and ask for your own to be met. So it is a very delicate balance. So what I always do is I just constantly check in with myself, and I check in with my inner child. And I say, if I had a daughter and she was in this situation, what would I want for her? Would I want her to continue in this relationship, or would I want her to walk away? And so that really helps me figure out, okay, is this something that is okay for me? And so I can then extend myself to my partner and just focus on their needs. Or is this something where I need to protect myself and I need to look after my own needs.
Love that. Thank you for, yeah, thank you for clarifying that, for giving us that insight. Pablo, I also wanted to touch upon another thing that people might be thinking right now is what you've just said about getting to the point where you started to become aware on your healing journey that everything was impacting Rebecca. And you now have to put that as a priority and you put the effort in. You made those changes for yourself. I'm just thinking, someone's thinking, oh, this is why it didn't work. They didn't care about me enough. They didn't love me enough. They didn't want to change for me. I didn't matter. I'm not enough. And all those big beliefs of the anxious attachers coming through now. I wonder if there's anything that we can say to this person that it's actually not about them, but it's about your personal journey. And what insight can we give them if they are starting to feel a little bit triggered in their beliefs that they're not enough just because maybe they're previous or present avoidant partner is not making those
I
changes?
think it's a good question. I think, first of all, I think that in general, that we all know that avoidant people tend to almost teach their anxious partners how to live without them, right? Because avoidant people disconnect, they go away, they're not connected. So you can ask your avoidant partner, is it here now that you change? And if they say yes, then the next question is, are you willing to do the work? Because it's very, very, we all know the healing process is very challenging. Like for me, for the first 8 months, it was extremes, up and downs, up and downs. Like you go in, it was terrifying, crying, you're releasing everything you've suppressed to your feet for 40 years. And now releasing it and getting emotional, just everything's coming to the surface. So I was prepared for that because, again, I hit rock bottom. And I'm not saying that every avoid person should hit rock bottom, but they should start to realize that whatever they're doing is affecting your partner. And it doesn't sound like it's affecting them in a good way. And a lot of avoidant people struggle with their internal world. It's happening inside. So when they come home from work, hi, honey, how was your day? And, we don't get oh, fine, it was good. And then they're just quiet. It means there's something inside going on inside. They're trying to figure it out because they can't connect to those feelings. And I had a lot of those moments. The main thing is reflecting. And it's not that avoiding people deflect a lot, but they have to start going inside because it is terrifying. Because, again, some avoidants do have this 1 foot in, 1 foot out. Why? Because it's terrifying for me to feel that my partner is a sense of security, safety, control. Because what happened when I was 9 years old, there's remnants of that. So it would slow everything down. Just slow it down. I don't want chaos. I just want to manage one or two things. That's it. Anything more than that is chaos. So you can imagine a avoidant partner coming in to the room. It could be just the energy. It could just be the mood. It could be anything. Not even speaking. And that could overwhelm them. That's how sensitive they are. They are hypersensitive to criticism, judging, and conflict. So it's that avoidant person becoming vulnerable. So again, going back to my question is it here now that you change? Because something has to change. Because it can't go back to say, I'm going to try better, and then I cross my fingers and toes and hope everything's going to work out. What are you going to do to change? And those are hard questions. Because yes, at the end of the day, avoidants don't want to change, and they don't want that effort of coming in, but they have to, because it's not about them. It's also about a partnership, right? Because as we all know, it's one partner and the other partner. You both have your separate issues, but then there's a relationship. So you guys at first have to come together, and part of it is becoming vulnerable, being connected and compassionate, and that's a big part of it. Because once you do that, and I guarantee you, if you do your work, you'll get to a point where you probably won't even recognize your relationship. I remember when we first started, and it was terrifying. I remember I was doing the same behavior, running. Like as soon as I heard, I knew it was coming. I knew the argument's coming. I did something wrong. So then she would come into the room. My first instinct was to flee, and I would literally flee into my car for a day or two. That's how much it triggered me. But again, when I hit rock bottom, it was like, okay, let's do things that we have never done before. So then I sat here and I listened to her for about 10 minutes. And then after that, I was just gripping the table because I wanted to go. It was terrifying. And then after 10 minutes, Rebecca thanked me. He said, thank you for listening. And it was in that moment that everything changed for me. Because I said, oh my gosh, that's all I have to do is just listen. So then I listened, and from that moment, it was like, it changed in me. Because it empowered me to say, okay, well, it's not that terrifying. And it didn't have to happen in 6 months. It actually literally happened in 1 week. It's just these little slivers that kind of encouraged me to say, okay, it's not that scary. I can actually do it. And nothing bad happened. I didn't get hit. I wasn't told to leave the house. I was okay. So then when that empowers you, it also made a change in Rebecca because she was used to that, me leaving. But then we slowly started connecting that way. And then the arguments started turning into discussions. And then the discussions are just regular, just day-to-day kind of questions. That's how it is now. I mean, it's been about 5 years, but that's how it was. So in my brain, my unconscious brain, I'm much healthier. Why? Because I've calmed down my mom, meaning Rebecca. So I've calmed her down, I fixed it. So now my brain is starting to heal. And then other things start to happen that are phenomenal, right? And finally knowing who you are after 40 years it's empowering. It's a beautiful journey.
It sounds like a beautiful journey, really and truly. And something that caught my attention when you said avoidants feel like they never have to change. And I think that's a lot of our narrative when it comes to the avoidant partners that we have and attract, is that they never change and it all has to be on us to try and mold ourselves and fit into their world as opposed to creating a new world. And it sounds like that's the journey that you guys have been on, has created your own world on this healing journey that you've walked together. And it's just so beautiful to hear. And just another question on top of that, Pablo, and then I want to get onto Rebecca's journey as well, is what is it that Rebecca did that supported you to heal more into secure attachment? So someone who's listening who has an avoidant partner is probably thinking, well, what can I do to help them, to support them? And I'd love to hear from both of you actually as well, you, Rebecca, if you have an insight into this. How can we support avoidant partners to take that road towards secure attachment?
I think we all know that people that lack accountability or responsibility will always feel like they're being attacked. And I think that's one of the things that applied to me because it was always deflecting. It was always what you did. You know, we always point fingers and always what you did. And I think avoidant people, because they're logical and rational and they're calm, they almost have this internal dialogue. Well, I'm very logical and rational. So I've told you about 100 times, don't come into the room. Don't be anxious. Why can't you listen? Are you not listening to me? So it's that kind of narrative where I started to understand and be compassionate, because vulnerability is about being compassionate and understand that Rebecca is not like me. For many years during our marriage, I thought she would mold to me. Why can't you be logical and rational like me? Why do you have to come in and have 20 things? You know, why don't you just be calm? And I've told you many times. So I think you have that narrative where how come you can't change and mold to what I'm thinking? Because I'm logical and rational and you're not. But it's being compassionate. I think that's what changed for me. Knowing that she is 180 degrees different than me. And I love her for everything that she is, because she picks me up when I am deep into that hypo-arousal state, going on depression, when I was unhealthy. She's very smart. She's intelligent. And she has a lot of things that I lack sometimes. But when she was emotional, I would come to her as opposed to be kind of scared of it. And just knowing that I can help her regulate. And that's one of the superpowers that avoidant people have. They can calm down their anxious partners. But I think a big part for me was becoming more vulnerable. When it became more vulnerable, which is a terrifying thing, I started becoming more connected to Rebecca.
Beautiful. And you pointed out a real big superpower of the more typical anxious avoidant relationships there is you really do balance each other out. Like you're more grounded and rational and logical, and we're up here and we're sensitive and we're emotional, but we have our beautiful nurturing side as well. And I think that's what really draws us in, and we attract each other's energies that way as well. So thank you so much, Pablo, for sharing such vulnerable insights into your journey. And Rebecca, I want to hear from you now what your journey was like, because you mentioned that you started the healing work before Pablo, so you were working towards secure attachment, and that's what really helped create that secure, safe foundation for the relationship. What did this look like for you, and how did you navigated this whole journey?
It's with my own work, because when the school that I went to, that was part of the curriculum. You had to do your own therapy. That you don't understand the journey unless you've gone there. How can you guide other people down a path you've never been down? You know? So that was incredibly helpful. And so healing myself, just like in the work you do with your anxious clients, that is key, because as Pablo was saying earlier, it's two people, individual people, and then the relationship. There's three things happening, right? It's not like a lot of anxious people sometimes think, oh, we have to be attached all the time. No, it should be two individuals who are secure and then a secure relationship. So doing my work really helped, because this is the thing I find with anxious people is they externalize everything as opposed to avoidant people who internalize everything. So like blame. The anxious person will say, you're making me feel this way. You did that, you're the problem. And avoidant people will say, I'm the problem. They shouldn't even be with me because I'm bad. And they internalize the blame. They take all of the blame. So understanding what I was doing and starting to take responsibility really helped me individually, because what it does is it empowers you. You don't feel helpless like, well, if he does this, I'm going to feel this way. Or if he does that, this is going to happen. You're giving your power away if you are blaming the other person and letting them affect you and everything that you feel. So if you start understanding, I am responsible for my own feelings. I know what's going to happen if I go in there when he needs space. He's going to shut down more or reject me, and then I'm going to feel this way. So I need to be responsible. Why do I keep doing the same thing that I know is going to make me feel this way? I got to stop doing that. If this person is unhealthy for me, I need to walk away. Don't get me wrong. In our relationship, there were two major times where I literally was going to walk away. And I have clients where I advise, I do think you should walk away. We're not saying that every anxious avoidant relationship is fixable, because they're not all fixable. Both people need to commit to doing their own work and then working on the relationship. So I think empowering myself and taking responsibility was huge for me. And then just learning to self-soothe, like actually taking it seriously and implementing them in my life. For our relationship, what really helps is co-regulation and being able to voice what you need for that. Because we have to remember that attachment starts with mother and child. And children don't know how to regulate themselves. They learn through co-regulation. And we are all built to be attached. So I think that it's really important that you have co-regulation, and that helps you learn how to self-regulate. So even if you're single and you're not co-regulating in a relationship, that's what the therapeutic relationship is for. You co-regulate with your therapist, and then you learn how to self-regulate. And you take all of those skills that you learn in therapy and you take it out into the real world and into your relationships.
I deeply resonate with the co-regulation part. I see this in all my clients. Their favorite part of the whole sessions that we have is the co-regulation part. And that's what they take away from it. And they learn, because you're right. We all learned how to survive. That comes from our reptilian brain. But the co-regulation part is what we get from our parents. And if we don't get that, we're at a loose end. We don't know how to do that. And it's beautiful that you brought that up. I want to circle back to another point you made about walking away and advising even your own clients that it may be time for you to consider walking away. I wonder if you could give us a bigger insight into what that might look like. What are those signs that it might be time to reconsider the relationship if growth isn't happening? Like, what does that look like? And what's the advice that you can give that person if they feel like they're at that point now where they really do have to make that decision?
I think that you have to, if your partner is not willing to change and they don't take responsibility for their behavior, then you can't force them to. You can't control them. If they're not willing to do that, there's no point moving forward. And you also have to monitor, how much is this impacting me? Has this become abusive behavior? Even if it's neglect, if you're an anxious person and you're with an avoidance, they don't tend to abuse, but they tend to neglect, which is a form of abuse. At some point, if it's abusive and neglectful, you have to protect yourself. So you have to walk away. But this is very difficult. And the push-pull dynamic comes in because you'll walk away and then they'll pull you back in. Because they'll be like, oh, I'm going to change, all these promises and all of that. So I think that once you've seen that pattern, I give my clients a lot of grace, and I understand that I may tell them to walk away. They may walk away, but then they'll get sucked back in. And this may happen a few times. And so I just expect it. I don't think they're going to walk away clean the first time. That's just not realistic, because attachment is so strong. It's so strong. But after it happens a few times, it's great, because then we can talk about the pattern and what is it that keeps you in that loop, and how do we break that? So it takes a few times. It's like addiction. Like, you could quit whatever you're addicted to, smoking, drinking, whatever. Chances are you're not going to quit cold turkey. It's going to take a few attempts.
100%. 100%. I see this in even my own personal experience as well. And you're right, it is a love addiction, and we have to treat it like an addiction. And as a therapist, as a coach, it's almost like expecting those relapses and not shaming them for those relapses, and figuring out the patterns and what hooks you back in. And yeah, I'm curious, guys, do you do this type of work with clients?
We specialize in attachment, and we love it, and we think that it's kind of the basis of everything. But some people, for whatever reason, they're not comfortable with the concept. They don't want to work with that. They bring in other things that are maybe more important at the time. So we need to work on that, and attachment will come up eventually. But I kind of just follow my clients where they need to go and bring in the modalities that I think would be most useful for them.
You know, the narrative, the foundation, we all goes back to attachment, because everything is attachment. Like, you know, your partners, your friendships, like everything affects attachment in the way you respond, the way you see the world, the way you react to stress and conflict. So it's a major part of our healing process.
If there's a listener here who is in an anxious avoidant relationship, can they come to you? Can they come to you for couples therapy or attachment healing? Is that possible? Can they get in touch with you for that?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
They can go on our website. They can book a session. We recommend that even if they're a couple, that they do individual work first. Because what we find is when couples come in, they spend a lot of the session just arguing or just talking about a recent argument, and we don't get a lot of the work done. So individual work for the beginning is most useful.
I absolutely agree. I say that as well, because especially as anxious lovers, we want to work on the relationship, not so much ourselves. Where the avoidant, they're more about themselves over the relationship. So I think it's really important to just drive that message home, that it's so important to start with yourself, your own healing, and that's what's going to result in a secure relationship, is becoming secure in yourself.
And we've never even done couples therapy. We've only done individual therapy, but we've healed our relationship.
Wow. I mean, maybe individual therapy is couples therapy.
For sure.
But in addition, just as we know, therapy is just part of the process, right? Personally, for me, meditation started opening my eyes to. It was a big tool that I used, meditation, because it was one of the first times that I had to start to reflect the internal world. It gave me an opportunity. So I would do that for about 30 minutes. I start to reflect, and that's another form of therapy. I started journaling. That was a huge part, because it was the first time that I actually sit with myself and what's going on inside. Again, this is all about self-reflecting, and then reading. So I think all of that did help.
Absolutely. I think there's so many different things out there. There's not just one size fits all, right? There's all these different components that come in to make up your own unique journey. And I think that's important, to sometimes go to more personal coaching or therapy over doing a course, because a cookie cutter course can sometimes just lead you in all sorts of directions and not even consider the uniqueness of your trauma wounds and attachment style and things like that. Pablo, Rebecca, I just want to thank you guys so much for all your insights, all your advice. I feel like we can just continue this conversation. I believe I just got so many other questions. Maybe we need a round two.
Absolutely.
But for now, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. And if people want to get in touch with you more, find out more about you, your work, and even schedule in some sessions, where can they
So we're in
find you?
Canada. So our website is connection-counseling with 2 L's. Because if you're in America, they'd spell it with just one. But if you're in the UK or Canada, it's 2 L's. So connection-counseling.ca, because we're in Canada.
Perfect. So they can just go to your website, find everything
Yes,
that they
and we
need
have
there.
a YouTube channel. We would love them to check out our YouTube channel. We have lots of videos on there that provide psychoeducation.
Perfect. All those links are going to be in the show notes, guys. So get exploring Rebecca and Pablo's stuff. And once again, guys, thank you
Thanks for
so
having us.
much
It's
for
an
being
absolute
here.
privilege and pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode on the Relationship Rehab Podcast. If you really enjoyed this episode, it would really mean a lot to me if you was to share this episode with a friend who really needs to hear what has been talked about today, and also to rate and review this podcast. Hit that subscribe or follow button so you don't miss any new episodes coming out. And as always, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment and let me know what your biggest takeaway was from this episode.